As expected, Man is officially off to the NBA, but I think this Duke basketball team next season is still going to be pretty good. A couple of exciting roster updates should be coming over the next few days.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. Thanks so much for being here with us today on Monday, April 28th, 2025. Locked On Blue Devils is your one-stop shop where we discuss everything going on inside the life of Duke athletics. Today's show, we got to break down the news from over the weekend. Khaman Maluach has officially declared for the 2025 NBA draft. We've got some Cedric Coward transfer portal news to discuss a little bit later in the program. All of that coming your way with our good friend Kevin Connelly from Ball Durham here on today's show. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and written review if you're listening to the podcast there on the Apple Podcast platform. Shout out to all the Spotify listeners. I know YouTube podcasts taken off, and you can also watch our show on YouTube each and every day. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, share it with your friends. We appreciate all the support that we get here on Locked On Blue Devils. So without further ado, he's here. It's Kevin Connelly back with us once again, one of our favorites here on the program to discuss the big news from over the weekend. I hope you're doing well, Kevin.
I'm good, JJ. How about yourself?
Can't complain, man. A couple of days left here in April as the calendar continues to fly by. Hopefully we've got a more picture, a finalized idea of what next year's basketball roster looks like over the next few weeks. What we now know officially, though, is that Khaman Maluach is heading off to the NBA. And boy, he waited till the very last minute for that decision to come in. I'm sure it was made probably sooner than that, but from the Duke announcement perspective and that sort of thing, it went all the way to the finish. But we officially have kind of the press release tour, the content tour that Duke puts out there with a quote from John Shire and that sort of thing. Man is headed off to the NBA.
Yeah, you know, I feel like a lot of these declarations were kind of strange this year, right?
Yeah.
I think the Tyrese Proctor one dropping at 8:00 on a Friday night, that was kind of interesting. Typically, like that's like a news dump that you're kind of trying to bury.
Yeah.
Instead of putting it out in the middle of the day where, you know, a lot of people will see it, especially coming on the heels of the weekend. Khaman Maluach, the official team posted about a day after the deadline to declare. But as we've said all off season, we kind of expected him to declare. Cooper Flagg, I think, and Connley were done at reasonable hours, kind of what we expected. So, and then even look at some of the returners, right?
Yeah.
I think it was like a day after the deadline to enter the portal. It was like, hey, Pat's back, Maliq's back. So it was a little strange in the timing on how some of these announcements were made this year. But I don't think once we got down to the wire, I don't think there were many surprises of players going or staying for this Duke team.
Well, over the next few days and weeks, and you'll be on several of those shows with me, Kevin, we'll start to do our annual end-of-year reviews for these guys, and so we can highlight more specifically what they were able to do, strengths, weaknesses, best parts, and that sort of thing. But as we've done with these NBA draft declarations over the last few weeks, it's important for us to take a moment to celebrate Khaman Maluach and the player that he was this season for Duke, the personality that he was off the court. I know a lot of people are highlighting his appearances on the Duke Blue Planet videos and just his joy for life, his joy for playing basketball, his joy for his teammates was certainly something that was really special to watch. When you think back at a year of Maluach, what are the things that you're thinking about?
I think the biggest thing is probably his development. And let's be honest, this is a guy who really didn't start playing basketball until 2019.
Yeah.
And got discovered by Luol Deng and goes to the NBA Africa Academy, is on the South Sudan Olympic team as a reserve player, and then comes to Duke. And a lot of people, as he was entering Duke, had this expectation on him that his potential combined with his size and what he's shown in a very short amount of time on a basketball court has him as a projected top 10 pick. And at times you saw that at Duke. You saw some of that dominance. but also at times you saw a very inexperienced player, not just that he was a college freshman.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, that he hadn't started playing basketball since 2019. And I think you saw some of that in the Final Four loss to Houston, where inexplicably at 7'1", 7'2", whatever he officially is, doesn't grab a rebound. And in a game where Duke desperately needed rebounding. And it was such a stark contrast from what he did against Alabama when he was one of the best players on the floor in that Elite Eight game. So I think there were a lot of ups and downs with Khaman Maluach, and I think that's kind of what you had to expect, even with his potential and that discussion that he's going to be a top 10, top 15 pick in the NBA draft, just because how inexperienced he is playing basketball at this such high level after only getting into the sport about 5-6 years ago.
When we look at these numbers for Maluach in the season that he had for the Blue Devils, played 39 games, started every single game that he played. So he was there for every single one of them for the Duke team. Finished shooting 71% from the floor, which included 4 3-point makes from the outside. He finished 4 of 16 from 3-point range. Did a really nice job shooting 77% from the free throw line as well. Scoring the basketball, the offensive player that man is. Obviously, that's a whole lot of lobs, dunks, layups around the rim and that sort of thing. But you've got to be thrilled with what he was able to do offensively, scoring the basketball.
Well, no doubt. And I mean, he wasn't asked to score a lot when you're on a team with Cooper Flagg and Con Knippel and Tyrese Proctor and even Sion James for what he was able to do shooting it from the outside. Yes, being a 7'2" lob threat gives you that impact presence in the paint. But when you look at it only averaging 8.6 points per game, as you mentioned, he certainly showed the ability to be able to score, but that wasn't his primary role on this team, to be a scorer. So I think that's where you're probably going to see him break in at the NBA. I don't think he's going to be a big-time scorer. I think, honestly, and I'm saying this a little bit because he's a Duke guy, I think you could see a Derek Lively type comparison, a pro comparison for him, especially in his first couple of years in the NBA.
Yeah, no, the fact that he's going to be a lob threat for whatever NBA team drafts him is going to be massive in literal sense with how large he is as a basketball player. And then on the defensive end of the floor, when he's able to alter shots and do all those sort of things, that's going to be big time for whatever team drafts Maluach. So we'll get set to see what that looks like for him. There are other transfer portal news and notes that we certainly want to dive into and discuss here on today's show, and we'll continue our conversation here in just a moment. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into those awesome player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many different ways to bet on your favorite player props, and it is the place to be for the NBA playoffs. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. FanDuel is a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. All right, Kevin Connelly's here with us today on Locked On Blue Devils. We're talking about Duke basketball player Khaman Maluach declaring for the 2025 NBA draft. Really quick kind of timeline for Maluach, Kevin. If we go back like a year ago, he shows up on an official visit to a basketball game that Duke was playing that season. And then pretty quickly after that, he made the decision to commit to play for Duke before the summer where he went to the Olympics and that sort of thing. Kind of came out of nowhere, and it felt like Duke was kind of the only school in the running for him, thanks in large part to that Luol Deng tie. And now he's already got good ties to the NBA as well.
Yeah, and don't forget, he was originally in the class of 2026. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why he was under the radar so much coming out of the NBA Africa Academy. And then when he commits, he's still finishing up his season in the NBA Africa Academy. And some of those games are on NBA TV or on the NBA app. And Duke fans are tuning in and watching him and following his stats and seeing what he can do. And you kind of saw why so many people are high on him. You saw the offensive ability. You saw the defensive ability. You saw what he was able to do running the floor. And then I think that hype only got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then even in the few glimpses we saw of him at the Olympics, it was like, this guy has some serious game. And then that translated obviously over to college. And I think a lot of people certainly liked him as a player at Duke. I think a lot of people are going to like him as a prospect in the NBA because he is only going to get better with more and more and more reps and more time he has to get on the court and be comfortable. And when you look at the NBA game, the floor spacing is a lot better than it is and a lot bigger than it is in college basketball. So for a big guy like that, especially as a lob threat, that's kind of why I compared him to a guy like Derek Lively. And Derek Lively didn't put up the biggest numbers in the world at Duke, battled some injury, averaged, I think, just over 5 points per game at Duke. And kind of what you've seen in his first 2 years in the NBA, although he has had some injury issues, he's floating around that 9 points per game average with about 7 or 8 rebounds per game. So I think especially early in the career of Khaman Maluach, it could be very similar to that of Derek Lively.
Yeah, I'm looking at his numbers here on the season from Bart Torvik. 81 dunks on the year for Maluach. 81 dunks around the rim. I mean, he's certainly a big-time lob threat for the Duke team this past season, and you would figure that that's going to be the case for him as he moves on to the next level to the NBA. There's obviously the immigration order that a lot of people were curious how this would impact Maluach's standings, and truthfully, I have no idea what the scenario is in that respect. That is something that is so much larger than basketball. Just certainly hope he's okay, and I'm excited that now he gets to kind of take this next step in his professional journey. And the last thing we'll say here is that it does seem like he's still viewed as a lottery pick, like we're talking about. Like, this is still a player that, with all the skills and potential and everything that we're talking about, teams really feel really excited about drafting Maluach to their team.
Well, and don't forget, teams draft on potential. That's one of the biggest things they draft on, and not to just continue the Derek Lively hype, but I think it's really comparable because he didn't have the best numbers in his freshman season at Duke. Yes, he was the number 1 overall recruit coming into college, but if you're drafting him based on his college output, he's certainly not a top 15 pick, and Derek Lively went 12th overall. So teams draft on potential, and that's why I think Khaman Maluach has a chance to go in the lottery and, like you said, be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft in June.
Okay, so now that he's out the door and you look at the front court for the Duke basketball team, we'll dive into this a little bit later in the show today as well and give you an update on Cedric Coward and what's going on. We saw Maliq Brown and Pat Ngongba II kind of work around Khaman Maluach. We'll leave Cameron Boozer and anybody else that kind of comes into the portal out of this discussion. But looking at those guys returning, they had a year working with man-man, making impact plays for the Duke basketball team. Now their roles get the boost and become larger, that Maluach won't be there.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, this was the expectation. This is what everyone thought and knew was going to happen with Maluach leaving after 1 year. And I think there were some questions early to midway part of the season about the center spot for Duke going into 25, 26 and next season. And I think you got a lot of those answers after the injury to Maliq Brown and seeing what Pat Ngongba could do on the floor. And it's like, okay, this kid can be our starting center next year. And I think that's what it's going to be going into the offseason and then eventually when November comes, when the season begins. And I think he'll be your number 1 center. I think Maliq Brown is kind of going to stay in that number 2 backup center role as that defensive weapon, the versatility that he brings, because he's not going to be that much of a scorer. And he's shown that this year, unless he takes a substantial jump in his offensive game. On the other side, for Pat Ngongba, I think you saw his ability to score, especially with Brown out in the postseason. You saw his ability to be a scorer, to put his back to the basket, to post teams up in that semifinal against North Carolina. Granted, North Carolina's big men were not great this year. He was a perfect 6 for 6. He had 12 points. And really, when you look at from the ACC tournament up until the Sweet 16, when he got a lot of playing time, even with the 3 healthy pieces on the floor, although Brown didn't play until that Sweet 16, he was really efficient. He was efficient. He was getting to the free throw line. He was knocking down free throws. And I think that span really answered a lot of questions in the mind of the coaching staff, saying, okay, we held this kid in really high regard. He got tough breaks in his senior year of high school, dealing with injuries. He fought back from them, but he wasn't really fully healed. So then they shut him down in the offseason to get him fully healthy.
Yeah.
And then right around the start of the season is when he got cleared. And towards the end of the season, right around the postseason, I think a lot of questions were answered in the minds of the coaching staff, because it's one thing to see it in practice. You also need to see it translate on the floor to games. And that certainly happened for Pat Ngongba. And like I said, I think he'll be your starting center opening night for Duke.
I'm thinking back to what you said about, going into this past year where he was out from injury, and a point that you always make here on Locked On Blue Devils, Kevin. It's a tradition, unfortunately, unlike any other, that we get into the offseason and somebody tends to be dealing with an injury for the Duke basketball team, right? I mean, we just can't catch a break with any of the injury luck typically over the course of the offseason with Duke.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the best thing to talk
No.
about, not the most ideal situation, but so again, sometimes these things always find their way of working itself out, and this one certainly did for the better, because he was healthy and his development showed at the end of the season.
Big time stuff from Pat, and excited to see what he can do this upcoming season. All right, we'll take our final break here on today's show. When we come back, we've got some more updates to give you guys right here on Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you could be a part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. I love those last-minute deals that come in handy and super clutch for sports, concert, comedy events, theater shows, and so much more. The all-in pricing is incredible as well, with no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay for. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. Game Time is a proud sponsor of Locked On Blue Devils. All right, we've got Kevin Connelly here with us on today's show from Ball Durham, talking Duke basketball, and now we turn our attention to next year's squad. We talked about the impact that the guys like Pat Ngongba II, Maliq Brown could have now that Maluach has declared for the NBA draft. And this morning, again, Monday morning, April 28th, we've gotten some updates on the Cedric Coward recruiting front. We've seen it from Jeff Goodman, saw it from Joe Tipton with On3. He's planning a visit to Duke today to be in Durham to visit with this coaching staff. And it seems like Cedric Coward is leaning toward the Blue Devils over Alabama. Those were the final two schools, the Washington State transfer, that is, Duke over Alabama. Pretty good update to have, man, when the guy is just now going on a visit to Duke.
Yeah, JJ, I kind of hinted at this on one of your previous shows, and it's kind of been trending like this for quite some time. It felt like Duke immediately was in the race for Cedric Coward and immediately a favorite to land him. It's been, I guess, close to a week now that it's kind of been Duke and Alabama as the two schools vying for his services, but Duke always appeared to have the upper hand as of now, and we know things can change really quickly in the recruiting world, but at least right now, it doesn't seem like that. And I think you also have that other third bubble in this recruitment of the NBA draft. He's also in the NBA draft and going through the NBA draft process. But then I think you have to break it down and think critically about this is, would Duke really be full out pursuing him like this if they had any intel on the NBA draft that he was more likely to stay in the draft and come back to college? So everything that I'm hearing right now is that Cedric Coward is likely to go to Duke, like you said, and is likely to remove his name from the NBA draft and play in college next year. I think there are other questions about him. I think obviously he was injured this year and missed most of the season for Washington State.
Injuries, here's another one.
I think that's a big question mark. And I think also and look, he has a lot of talent. He has really good numbers at every stop he's been. He has a really cool story starting at, I believe it was Division II. But the competition, when he was at Eastern Washington, he really didn't play that many great teams. He was only at Washington State and healthy to play for a short amount of time. I think the only big-time power school he played was Iowa, and he didn't have one of his better performances in that game. So I think there are certainly questions that need to be answered with Cedric Coward and how he could translate to playing a loaded Duke basketball schedule, kind of that we anticipate. already have some big dates booked on the schedule for next season. So, but the biggest thing that you would want to translate over, which you would hope would translate over, is the 3-point shooting numbers, because he is statistically a really good 3-point shooter at all the other stops he's had in his career.
Yeah, let's put those numbers on the screen from this past season for Coward. 6 games played at Washington State. In those 6 games, he was averaging 33 minutes per game, 17.7 points per game, 7 rebounds on 56% shooting from the floor, 40% from three-point range, and 84% shooting from the free throw line. I see buckets when I look at those stats. That's what I see. And, using his frame well to get 7 rebounds, shared the ball a good bit for Washington State, and knowing what Duke has been able to do with transfers over the last few seasons. Sion James is putting himself in a position to possibly be a second-round pick in this year's NBA draft. I think this is an awesome move, and I think both parties will greatly benefit if Cedric Coward does ultimately decide to play college basketball next year, and if he makes that decision to play college basketball at Duke over other spots out there.
No, 100%. And I think when he talked about Sion James, I feel like Cedric Coward is, if he ends up on this Duke roster, would fill a Sion James-like role. I mean, when you kind of pan out the starting 5 for next season, I think you're thinking Caleb Foster at the 1. We just talked about Pat Ngongba. He's probably going to be your 5. Cameron Boozer as your 4. I think Isaiah Evans slides into that small forward 3 spot. Yeah. And then you're looking at a 2 and a shooting guard. I don't know, Sion James spent some time on the ball this year with Tyrese Proctor and whatnot, but I think Cedric Coward kind of slides into that number 2, quote unquote, shooting guard role, and kind of what is vacated now by Sion James graduating.
I think there's a chance he starts. I mean, I think there'd be an opportunity for him to compete there with Nicholas Amenia for that final spot. Again, we don't have very many roster spots or guys on the roster right now to kind of speculate who's going to be where, because now that becomes the next big question for the Duke basketball staff is, what does the rest of our roster look like? We've got so many openings within the team themselves. As we put our latest scholarship chart up on the screen for those watching us here on YouTube, you could see here 7 available scholarship spots for Duke basketball going into the next season, probably down to 6. Many people assume that Cam Sheffield's going to be coming back for another season and will earn a scholarship this time around for the Duke basketball team for his hard work as a practice level type player, although I don't know how much he's going to contribute to the gameplay and that sort of thing. When you see this, though, Kevin, regardless, Duke's got work to do, man, in terms of finding more players to build out this roster. There are a lot of openings.
There are, and I think you also have to carry into effect that they might not be done yet with high school recruiting.
Right.
I believe they were in for Braden Hawthorne over the weekend or even last week, a 4-star recruit who recently decommitted from West Virginia. So that's a name to look at. We've talked about a couple of times. I'm drawing a quick blank on
Sebastian Wilkins.
Sebastian Wilkins, yeah, the 2026 prospect from Brewster Academy, who is rumored to be going into the class of 2025 this summer. So I think those are 2 names that you could potentially look at, maybe as guys who aren't going to get a lot of minutes if they were to join this Duke team next year, but be rotational pieces if they're able to retain them for 2026, 2027, because obviously we know how important roster retention, at least this offseason, was to John Shire. So I think those are 2 names to monitor as well. So there's still some ways where Duke will fill out this roster going forward. Like I said, Cedric Coward as a transfer, maybe they in to 1 more, but when you look at what's available right now in the portal, there's not that many players still out there for you to bring in. Yeah. So I wouldn't be expecting that big of a transfer portal class for Duke this spring.
Well, let me know if you agree with this. When I look at kind of this roster here and players that could be added, not throwing names out there because I'll let the Duke staff find those players that could be to make a level of impact. When I'm looking at the positions and things of need, I certainly think there's a need for another ball handler if you could find somebody with a little bit of experience in that area. And then front court depth always. We've talked injuries, talking about Maliq Brown, who's recovering from shoulder surgery now and the injuries he sustained this past season. Then you've got Pat Ngongba, who battled injuries, and then Cameron Boozer. I mean, your depth up there in the front court, those are the 2 big things for me. Big bodies, and then trying to find another ball handler would be the 2 things.
No, I 100% agree. I think you certainly need depth at both those positions, just in case of a doomsday scenario of injuries piling up, and other things that could arise. I mean, we saw with Caleb Foster this past season. Started the year as a starter, then was out of the rotation, and then all of a sudden became a guy back in the rotation late in the season. So you never know what could happen in the college basketball year. But like you said, I do think they do need to add depth up front and at point guard.
Here's something I do know that can happen is that people can always stay up to date on everything going on in the life of Duke basketball when they take a visit over to Ball Durham. Tell us about your work, Kevin.
Yeah, over at Ball Durham, we got everything you want on Duke basketball. We're covering the offseason wall to wall. We're covering these roster moves and what could potentially be coming to Durham next season. So yeah, come read us every single day over at balldurham.com. You can follow us on social media at ball_Durham as well.
Always great to visit with you, Kevin. We'll do it again soon, okay?
Thanks, JJ.
All right, that's Kevin Connelly joining us here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Go support his work over at Ball Durham. Be sure to check us out each and every day right here on Locked On Blue Devils. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and subscribe wherever it is that you get your podcasts. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.